The courthouse in Brookdale was already buzzing with tension that morning. The worn marble floors echoed with hurried footsteps. Lawyers shuffled papers, and the smell of fresh coffee lingered faintly in the air. People filled the courtroom gallery, waiting for the judge to arrive. Among them sat a tall black woman in her 40s, dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit. She carried a simple leather folder, her posture upright, her face calm but unreadable. She sat quietly in the second row, not drawing attention to herself, simply waiting. Just a few seats away, a white woman in her early 50s shifted uncomfortably. She had the kind of presence people immediately recognized: impatient, opinionated, loud when things didn't go her way. Her name was Patricia, though most in town knew her by the whispered nickname Karen. Karen glanced at the black woman, her lips pressing into a thin line. She adjusted her purse on her lap, as if the very presence of the woman nearby unsettled her. In her mind, this wasn't a seat for just anyone. It was a courtroom, a place for lawyers, witnesses, or officials, not for someone she didn't recognize, and certainly not, she thought, for this woman. Leaning slightly toward her, Karen whispered sharply, "Are you sure you're supposed to be sitting here? This isn't for outsiders?" The black woman didn't flinch. She simply kept her eyes forward, her hands resting on her folder. Karen frowned louder this time, making sure others could hear. "This section is for professionals. Maybe you should wait in the back or outside." A few heads turned at the sound of her voice, some raising their brows, others quickly looking away. The black woman remained silent, composed, as if she'd heard it all before. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted. A spark of tension had been lit, and everyone knew it. Karen's voice cut through the low murmur of the courtroom like a knife. She leaned further toward the black woman, her tone sharp and impatient. "I don't think you understand," she said, her voice rising. "These seats aren't for people like you. You're probably supposed to be back there with the defendants or family members. This is for people who belong here." The words carried across the rows, drawing glances from attorneys, shuffling their briefs, and a few spectators waiting for their cases to be called. An uncomfortable silence settled, the kind that made even the hum of the fluorescent lights seem louder. The black woman did not turn her head. She didn't respond. Her calm silence only seemed to fuel Karen's irritation. Karen huffed, sat up straighter, and raised her hand. "Excuse me," she called out toward the bailiff, who was standing near the double doors. "Can you do something about this?" The bailiff, a tall man in his 40s with a shaved head, looked over, his brows knitting together. "What seems to be the issue, ma'am?" Karen pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the black woman beside her. "She's in the wrong seat. She's not supposed to be sitting here. People like her shouldn't be up front, and I don't want to get in trouble for her being here when the judge comes in." A ripple of unease ran through the gallery. A few spectators shifted in their seats, some lowering their eyes, others shaking their heads in quiet disbelief. The bailiff looked at the black woman, then back at Karen, his expression neutral but edged with irritation. The woman in the charcoal gray suit remained perfectly still, her hands folded neatly over her folder. She didn't explain herself. She didn't argue. She simply met the bailiff's eyes with a steady gaze, one that carried weight far beyond words. The bailiff hesitated, caught between Karen's loud insistence and the calm authority radiating from the woman she accused. He opened his mouth to respond, but just then, the side door to the courtroom creaked open slightly, the signal that the judge would be arriving soon. Karen smirked triumphantly, leaning back in her seat. "Good. Once the judge gets here, she'll see what I mean." She had no idea how wrong she was. The courtroom air grew heavier as the minutes dragged on. Lawyers whispered to their clients, flipping through files, while spectators tapped nervously on phones or adjusted in their seats. But the attention of half the room was still drawn toward the front row, where Karen continued her crusade. She leaned forward again, her voice louder now, making sure others heard. "Unbelievable. Sitting there like you own the place. You're going to embarrass yourself when the judge comes in? Honestly, it's disrespectful." A man 2 rows back shifted uncomfortably and muttered, "Just let it go," under his breath. But Karen wasn't interested in letting anything go. She turned back to the bailiff. "Why hasn't she been removed yet? Do I need to explain to the judge myself that someone is sitting where they shouldn't be?" The bailiff exhaled slowly through his nose, clearly irritated, but before he could speak, the black woman finally shifted. Not much, just a slight adjustment of her shoulders, and the faintest shake of her head. She still didn't say a word. That silence seemed to infuriate Karen even more. She raised her voice again, addressing the whole gallery this time. This courtroom has rules. If we let just anyone sit wherever they want, then what's the point? Some people need to understand their place. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room at her choice of words. A young man near the back whispered, "Did she just say that out loud?" Others exchanged uneasy glances. The black woman sat unbothered, her hands still calmly folded over the leather folder in her lap. If anything, her composure stood in sharper contrast to Karen's rising hysteria. Karen, mistaking silence for weakness, smirked smugly. "Don't worry," she said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "The judge will be here any moment, and she'll take care of this." You'll see the bailiff's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, his eyes flicking toward the side door where the judge was expected to enter. The atmosphere was no longer just tense. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and the spark was only seconds away. The bailiff cleared his throat and raised his voice above the low murmur of the crowd. "All rise for the honorable judge." Instantly, the courtroom shifted. Lawyers stood quickly, papers tucked under their arms, clients straightened in their seats, and every head turned toward the side door at the front. The atmosphere, already tense, now bristled with anticipation. Karen, still smirking, rose with exaggerated dignity. She leaned sideways, muttering to the black woman who remained seated a beat longer than the rest. "Better stand now. This is where you get told to move." The woman in the gray suit rose slowly, deliberately, her movements measured. She held her leather folder at her side and stepped into the aisle. Karen's eyes lit up as if she'd won some unspoken battle. She whispered, just loud enough for others nearby to hear, "Finally." But then, to Karen's confusion, the woman did not turn toward the exit or the back benches. Instead, she walked forward, her heels clicking steadily against the polished floor, each step echoing in the hushed chamber. Whispers rippled through the gallery. A few people exchanged puzzled looks. The bailiff straightened his posture and gave a subtle nod as the woman approached. Karen blinked, her smug expression faltering. "Wait, where is she going?" she muttered under her breath. The answer came in the most shocking way possible. The black woman reached the steps to the raised bench, set down her folder, and without hesitation ascended. She slipped behind the imposing desk, adjusted the black robe draped neatly over her chair, and seated herself with calm authority. Gasps swept the room. A stunned silence followed. The bailiff's voice rang out, steady and official. "The Honorable Judge Harris presiding." Karen's mouth fell open. She gripped her purse tightly, her face draining of color as the realization crashed over her. The woman she had mocked, dismissed, and demanded be removed was not an intruder at all. She was the judge. And now, she was the one in charge of the entire courtroom. For a moment, the entire courtroom was frozen, as though time itself had stopped. Judge Harris adjusted her robe, placed her folder neatly on the bench, and gave a calm nod to the bailiff. Her composure radiated authority, the kind that filled every corner of the chamber without the need for raised voices. Karen, still standing stiffly in the gallery, felt her face burn. The smug confidence she'd carried moments earlier evaporated in an instant. She clutched her purse like a shield, her wide eyes darting around the room, searching for some escape from the stares now directed at her. Because people were staring. Lawyers, spectators, even a few defendants waiting nervously for their cases. All of them had witnessed Karen's loud demands, her patronizing tone, and her insistence that Judge Harris didn't belong. Now, those same words hung in the air, bitter reminders of her arrogance. Judge Harris tapped her gavel lightly, bringing the room fully to order. "You may all be seated," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, steady, the kind of voice that carried power without effort. The gallery sat, the shuffle of movement echoing awkwardly. Karen lowered herself into her seat slowly, her face still flushed, her lips pressed tight, as if holding back words she no longer dared to speak. From her elevated bench, Judge Harris scanned the room, her gaze sweeping evenly across every face. When her eyes passed over Karen, they paused for the briefest second, not in anger, not in gloating, but with a measured calm that was somehow more cutting than any direct rebuke. Karen dropped her gaze immediately, staring at her lap. The judge opened her docket, flipping to the first page, and began the proceedings as though nothing unusual had happened. But everyone in the room carried the weight of what they had just witnessed. Karen's own whispers. People like her shouldn't be up front. She doesn't belong here. Now rang hollow and shameful in the minds of those who'd heard them. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, wishing she could disappear into the wood paneling. For the first time, she realized there would be no undoing what had just happened. The woman she had dismissed so casually wasn't just a participant in the courtroom. She was the one who commanded it. The courtroom returned to its rhythm, but beneath the surface, the atmosphere was different. Every shuffle of paper, every whispered exchange between attorneys carried an undercurrent of tension. People pretended to focus on their own business, but their eyes kept drifting to the front row. To Karen, sitting rigid and pale, her earlier bravado crumbled into silence. Judge Harris presided with effortless authority. She called the first case, her gavel tapping once to bring order. Her questions to the attorneys were sharp but fair, her tone steady. There was no trace of irritation in her voice, no hint that she'd been publicly challenged only minutes earlier. She carried herself as if she'd seen everything before, and nothing could shake her composure. But Karen felt each word like it was directed at her. Every "respect this courtroom" and every "we will maintain order here" seemed to echo louder in her ears than in anyone else's. She shifted in her seat, clutching her purse tighter, wishing she could shrink small enough to go unnoticed. Yet she knew she was the most noticed person in the room, and for all the wrong reasons. The bailiff, standing at his post near the bench, glanced her way once. His expression was unreadable, but the slight tightening of his jaw told her he hadn't forgotten her earlier outburst. Neither had the spectators, who stole occasional side glances, some shaking their heads almost imperceptibly. Karen's humiliation grew heavier with every passing minute. She had marched in here certain of her place, certain of her right to correct someone she thought didn't belong. And now, here she sat, forced to watch that very woman command the entire courtroom, every lawyer and every spectator rising and falling in respect at her words. She wished the floor would open beneath her, but there was no escape. Judge Harris continued unfazed, but when her gaze briefly passed over Karen again, the slightest pause lingered in her eyes. Not unkind, not mocking, but firm, as though to say, "This is what authority looks like, and it doesn't need your permission." Karen dropped her eyes to her lap, her cheeks burning. The courtroom carried on, but the lesson was already written. The morning docket wound down, but the tension never fully left the room. Lawyers shuffled their files, defendants were escorted out one by one, and the hum of quiet conversations lingered. Yet everyone in the gallery still carried the memory of what had happened at the start, and all eyes occasionally flicked toward the front row, where Karen sat stiff as a board, trying to be invisible. Judge Harris tapped her gavel gently after the last case was resolved. "Before we adjourn," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "I want to remind everyone of something important." The rustle of papers stopped. Every head turned toward her. "This courtroom," she continued, "is not just a place where laws are argued. It is a place where respect must guide our actions. Respect for the process, respect for the people, and respect for one another." Her gaze moved across the gallery, deliberate and steady. "It is not our place to decide who belongs and who does not, based on assumptions, appearances, or prejudice. Everyone who enters this chamber is entitled to dignity, and as long as I preside here, they will receive it." Her words settled over the room like a final verdict. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel strike. Karen shifted in her seat, her cheeks burning red. She knew, and everyone else knew, that this reminder was aimed squarely at her. But Judge Harris had not singled her out by name. She hadn't humiliated her. She had done something far more powerful. She had turned Karen's insult into a universal lesson, one the entire courtroom would carry with them. The bailiff announced the adjournment. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Harris left the bench, her robe flowing behind her, her presence commanding even in her silence. Only after she disappeared through the side door did the buzz of voices return. Some spectators shook their heads at Karen as they filed out. Others gave her knowing looks, the kind that stung worse than words. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, clutching her purse tightly, wishing she could vanish. But for Judge Harris, the day continued as usual. She had no need to dwell on the moment. Her authority had already spoken louder than Karen ever could, and in that courtroom, respect had been redefined.